In the cracked concrete courtyard of a Detroit high school, a soft-spoken transfer student was about to become the center of a confrontation she never asked for. What started as an ordinary school lunch break took a shocking turn when she was ordered publicly and cruelly to kneel and clean the sneakers of the school's star athletes. Ava Cheng wasn't your typical high school junior. For 7 years, she had trained in silence beneath the stone floors of a remote Shaolin temple, known for her discipline, deadly precision, and an oath never to strike first dot when she encountered a group of students laughing as her sketchbook was torn and her dignity mocked. She had no idea she was on the verge of unleashing the truth she'd spent years burying. Ava made a choice, one forged in pain and principle, that would lead to a confrontation none of them would forget. What began as a moment of humiliation would become a movement of reckoning. The halls of Booker T. Washington High would never be the same after the girl they called weak reminded everyone what true strength looks like. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Ava Cheng had always been small for her age. At 16, she barely reached 5 feet 3 inches and weighed no more than 110 pounds soaking wet. Her delicate frame, combined with her naturally quiet demeanor and wire-rimmed glasses, made her practically invisible as she navigated the crowded hallways of Booker T. Washington High School in Detroit. She had transferred here 3 weeks ago when her Aunt May brought her to America after her grandfather's death, and fitting in had proven more challenging than she had anticipated. The school itself was typical of urban American high schools: red brick buildings connected by covered walkways, fluorescent lit hallways lined with blue lockers, and the eternal smell of cafeteria pizza and floor wax. Ava navigated these corridors like a ghost, keeping her head down and her earbuds in, hoping to make it through each day without drawing attention to herself. What her classmates didn't know was that Ava had spent the last 10 years training in traditional martial arts under her grandfather's guidance. Master Cheng had been a former Shaolin monk who had passed on his knowledge to his granddaughter from the age of 6. Ava was proficient in Wing Chun, Wudang sword forms, and combat techniques that most adults twice her size couldn't master. But she kept this secret locked away, following her grandfather's strict teachings about using violence only as a last resort and never for showing off. In Miss Patterson's English class, would you like to introduce yourself? The teacher's voice cut through Ava's thoughts as she realized the entire class was staring at her. I'm Ava Cheng, she said softly, her slight accent barely noticeable. I just moved here from China. A few students exchanged glances, and she caught whispers about her thrift store clothes and thick glasses. In the back row, she noticed a tall boy with perfectly styled hair and expensive basketball shoes watching her with calculating eyes. That was Deandra Miller, though she didn't know his name yet. Ava, why don't you sit next to Jaden? Ms. Patterson gestured to a lanky boy with kind eyes and a camera hanging around his neck. He can be your partner for the poetry project. Jaden Ross looked up from his notebook and offered a shy smile. Hey, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm Jaden. I stutter sometimes, but I promise I'm not weird. Thank you, Ava replied, settling into the desk beside him. She noticed he had been sketching in the margins of his notebook detailed drawings of faces and landscapes that showed real talent. As class continued, Ava felt eyes on her back. She turned slightly and saw a girl with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes staring at her with undisguised curiosity. This was Kayla Jordan, the undisputed queen of the school's social hierarchy, though Ava had no way of knowing that yet. New girl seems scared of her own shadow, Kayla whispered to her friend Ashley, loud enough for Ava to hear. Ava's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her expression neutral. Her grandfather had taught her that showing emotion was giving away power. Instead, she focused on copying down the assignment from the board. When the bell rang, Jaden gathered his things slowly. "If you need help finding your next class, I can show you around," he offered. "That's kind of you," Ava said, checking her schedule. "I have chemistry with Mr. Rodriguez. Same here. Come on, I'll walk with you." As they left the classroom, Ava noticed Deandra and Kayla watching them from across the hallway. Deandra said something to Kayla that made her laugh, and Ava felt a chill run down her spine. She had seen that look before predators sizing up prey. The harassment began slowly, like water finding cracks in stone. At first, it was barely noticeable, a shoulder bump in the hallway that sent Ava's book scattering, an accidental elbow to her ribs in the crowded cafeteria line, snickers when she answered questions in class. Ava endured it all in silence. Her jaw clenched tight and her hands steady despite the rage building inside her. Control, she would remind herself, discipline. There are always alternatives to violence. But the alternatives weren't working. 3 weeks into her time at Booker T. Washington, Ava arrived at her locker to find chocolate milk seeping through the vents. She opened the metal door and watched brown liquid drip onto her textbooks, ruining her chemistry notes and the sketches she had been working on during study hall. "Oops," came a voice from behind her. Kayla Jordan stood there with Ashley Cooper, both of them struggling to contain their laughter. Someone must have had an accident. That's what happens when you leave your locker unlocked. "I didn't leave it unlocked," Ava said quietly, using her jacket to wipe the milk from her books. "Are you calling me a liar?" Kayla stepped closer, her blue eyes flashing with manufactured indignation. "Because I saw you walk away without spinning the combination." Ava knew it was pointless to argue. She had definitely locked her locker. She checked it twice out of habit. Someone had gotten the combination somehow, probably from a friend who worked in the office. Instead of responding, she continued cleaning up the mess. "Cat got your tongue?" Ashley chimed in, mimicking Ava's accent. "Or maybe you just can't understand English very well." Several students had gathered to watch the confrontation, some recording with their phones. Ava felt the familiar flutter of combat awareness in her chest, the way her grandfather had taught her to assess threats and exits. But she pushed it down, focusing on salvaging what she could from her locker. "Don't react," she told herself. Violence is never the first option. The real escalation came during gym class. Ava had been changing into her uniform when she noticed Kayla holding up her phone, clearly recording her. The flash of the camera was unmistakable. "Did you just take a picture of me?" Ava asked, her voice still quiet but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "Prove it," Kayla said, sliding her phone into her gym bag. "Besides, it's not like you have anything worth looking at." The other girls in the locker room giggled nervously. Ava felt her face burn with embarrassment, but more than that, she felt something deeper, a violation of trust and safety that reminded her of darker times in her past. That evening, Ava practiced her forms in the small space between her bed and the wall in her aunt's apartment. Each movement was precise and controlled, her breathing steady as she flowed through the sequences her grandfather had taught her. The familiar patterns helped calm her mind, but they also reminded her of the power she carried in her hands. "Ava?" Aunt May knocked softly on the door. "Are you all right? You seem troubled." "I'm fine, Aunt May," Ava replied, though she knew her aunt could see through the lie. May Cheng had raised her brother's granddaughter for only a few weeks, but she had already learned to read the signs of distress. "Your grandfather used to practice late at night when something was bothering him," May said, settling onto the edge of the bed. He said the forms helped him think clearly about difficult decisions. Ava stopped moving and turned to face her aunt. "What if someone keeps hurting you, but you know you could stop them? What if staying peaceful just makes them think they can hurt you more?" May was quiet for a long moment, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "Your grandfather always said that a warrior's greatest strength is knowing when not to fight. But he also said that sometimes not fighting is the same as letting evil win. What does that mean? It means wisdom comes from knowing the difference between avoiding conflict and avoiding responsibility. May stood and kissed Ava's forehead. Trust yourself, little one. You have good instincts. The next morning, Ava arrived at school early and went straight to the library, hoping to find a quiet place to work on her English essay. She had been writing for about 20 minutes when she heard familiar voices approaching. There she is. Kayla's voice carried across the library. Miss Perfect with her perfect grades and her perfect little drawings. Ava looked up to see Kayla, Ashley, and Deandra approaching her table. The librarian was nowhere to be seen, probably in the back office sorting books. We need to talk, Deandra said, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable threat. You've been causing problems for my girl here. I don't know what you mean, Ava replied, closing her notebook and preparing to leave. Don't play dumb, Kayla snapped. You complained to Ms. Patterson about the locker thing. Now she's asking questions about bullying. I never complained to anyone, Ava said truthfully. She had considered it, but in the end, she had chosen to handle the situation herself. Right, Deandra said, stepping closer. And I suppose you didn't tell that weird kid with the camera to start following us around either. Ava's blood chilled. If they were targeting Jaden now, things were escalating beyond her ability to control through simple avoidance. Leave him alone, she said, her voice quiet but firm. He has nothing to do with this. Oh, so now you're giving orders? Deandra laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's funny, coming from someone who couldn't even defend herself against a little chocolate milk. Ashley giggled nervously, looking around to make sure they were still alone. Maybe we should go, she whispered. If someone sees us, nobody's going to see anything, Kayla interrupted. New girl here is going to learn some respect, and then she's going to mind her own business. Ava felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before a fight. Her grandfather's training kicked in automatically. She noted the positions of her opponents, the exits from the library, the weight distribution that would give her the best leverage if she needed to move quickly. But she also remembered his voice. The strongest warrior is the one who wins without fighting. What do you want? Ava asked. Simple, Deandra said. You're going to transfer to a different school. Tell your aunt you don't like it here. Tell her the other students are mean to you. Whatever you need to say, and if I don't, then things are going to get much worse for you and your little friend. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The confrontation Ava had been dreading came on a Tuesday during lunch period. She had been sitting at her usual table in the corner of the cafeteria, quietly eating her homemade sandwich while working on chemistry problems, when she heard chairs scraping against the floor. Deandra Miller stood over her table, flanked by Kayla and 3 other basketball players. His expensive Nike sneakers were caked with mud from the outdoor courts, and his jersey was still damp with sweat from practice. Well, Deandra announced, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. Look what we have here. The new girl who thinks she's too good to follow simple instructions. Conversations at nearby tables stopped. Students turned to watch, some already pulling out their phones. Ava felt the familiar weight of attention, but this time it felt different, heavier, more dangerous. I don't want any trouble, Ava said softly, starting to pack up her lunch. Too late for that, Kayla said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. You had your chance to do this the easy way. Deandra picked up one of his muddy sneakers and dropped it on Ava's table with a wet thud. You want to stay at our school? Fine, but you're going to learn your place first. The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. Even the lunch ladies had stopped serving to watch the confrontation. Ava could see Ms. Riley, the art teacher, standing up from her table across the room, but she was too far away to intervene quickly. "Clean it," Deandra said simply. "What?" Ava looked up at him, not sure she had heard correctly. "You heard me. Clean my shoe. There's some napkins right there." He pointed to the dispenser on her table. "Get on your knees and clean it properly." Ava felt something cold settle in her stomach. This wasn't just bullying anymore. This was about dominance, about breaking her spirit in front of the entire school. She looked around the cafeteria and saw hundreds of eyes watching her, waiting to see what she would do. "I'm not going to do that," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "Oh, but you are," Kayla said, holding up her phone. "Because if you don't, this is going to get much worse. And we'll make sure everyone knows what a coward you really are." "She's probably used to it," one of the basketball players said. "I bet where she comes from, this is normal." Laughter rippled through the watching crowd. Ava felt her face burn with shame and anger, but she kept her expression neutral. Her grandfather had taught her to endure humiliation without losing her center. "Clean the shoe," Deandra repeated, "or I'm going to assume you're too proud to be part of this school." Ava looked at the muddy sneaker on her table. She thought about her grandfather's teachings about humility, about choosing peace over pride. She thought about the promise she had made to herself, to avoid conflict at all costs. Then she thought about all the students watching, waiting to see if she would allow herself to be broken. Slowly, Ava reached for the napkins. The crowd held its breath as she stood up, then knelt down beside the table. She could hear Kayla's phone recording, capturing every second of her humiliation. But as she knelt there, something shifted inside her. She wasn't kneeling in submission, she was choosing her moment. Her grandfather had taught her that sometimes the strongest position was the one that looked weakest to your enemies. She cleaned the shoe methodically, her movements precise and controlled. When she finished, she looked up at Deandra and said, "Is that what you wanted?" "See," Deandra said to the crowd. "I told you she knew her place." The laughter that followed was the sound of a pack celebrating a kill. Ava stood up, gathered her things, and walked out of the cafeteria with her head high, even as she heard the whispers and snickers following her. But in the quiet of the hallway, she made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to her aunt. "I'm ready to learn the advanced forms you mentioned, all of them." The video of Ava cleaning Deandra's shoes spread through the school like wildfire. By the end of the day, it had been shared hundreds of times with captions like "New girl learns her place," and "When keeping it real goes wrong." Students who had never spoken to her before now looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Don't react," Ava told herself as she walked through the hallways, feeling the weight of every stare. "Don't give them what they want." But the harassment didn't stop with the video. If anything, it intensified. Students would bow mockingly when she passed, or drop things on the floor and ask her to pick them up. Someone taped a sign to her locker that read, "Cleaning services available." The worst part was the way it affected her relationship with Jaden. He had tried to delete the video from several social media platforms, but it kept reappearing. Now he was being targeted too, with students calling him her bodyguard and pushing him around in the hallways. "I should have done something," Jaden said during their shared study period, his voice tight with guilt. "I was right there with my camera and I just froze." "It's not your fault," Ava replied, though she could see the bruise on his arm where someone had grabbed him too hard. "You couldn't have stopped it, but I could have recorded it properly. I could have shown what really happened instead of letting them control the narrative." Ava looked at her friend, quiet, kind Jaden, who had been the only person to show her genuine kindness since she arrived. Now he was suffering because of her, and she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. That afternoon, Deandra found them both at Jaden's locker. He was with Malik Thomas, another basketball player who usually stayed in the background but went along with whatever Deandra wanted. "Well, well," Deandra said, loud enough for other students to hear. "If it isn't the cleaning lady and her little photographer friend." "Leave us alone," Jaden said, his voice cracking slightly. "Oh, did I hurt your feelings?" Deandra pushed Jaden against the locker, not hard enough to cause real injury, but enough to make him stumble. "Maybe you should find some friends who aren't so embarrassing." "Don't touch him," Ava said, stepping between them. "Or what?" Deandra laughed. "You're going to clean my shoes again?" The students in the hallway stopped to watch, sensing another confrontation. Ava felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, but this time it was different. This time, it wasn't just about her. It was about protecting someone who couldn't protect himself. "I'm asking you nicely," Ava said, her voice quiet but carrying a weight that made Deandra pause. "Walk away." "You're asking me nicely?" Deandra's eyes narrowed. "That's rich, coming from someone who spent yesterday on her knees." He shoved Jaden. Again, harder this time. Jaden's head hit the locker with a metallic clang, and Ava saw him wince in pain. That was when something broke inside her. "Enough," she said, and her voice carried a tone that made everyone in the hallway go silent. Deandra looked at her with surprise. "What did you just—" "I said enough." Ava stepped closer, and for the first time since arriving at the school, she let her training show in her posture. Her stance shifted subtly, her center of gravity lowering, her hands moving to positions that would allow her to react instantly to any threat. "You want to keep pushing people around because it makes you feel powerful?" she continued. "Fine, but you're going to leave him alone. Are you threatening me?" Deandra asked, but there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before: uncertainty. "I'm giving you a choice," Ava replied. "You can walk away now, or you can find out what happens when someone doesn't." The hallway was completely silent now. Even Malik had stepped back, sensing that something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic. Deandra looked around at all the watching faces, realizing that his reputation was on the line. He couldn't back down in front of everyone. But there was something about Ava's stillness that made him hesitate. "This isn't over," he said finally, but he stepped away from Jaden. "Yes," Ava said quietly. "It is." The final confrontation came 3 days later, in the hallway outside the chemistry lab. Ava had been walking to class with her sketchbook under her arm, the same one she had been working on during lunch the day of the shoe incident. It contained months of drawings, including several of her grandfather and the temple where she had grown up. She was thinking about the letter she had written to her aunt the night before, asking to be transferred to a different school, when she heard footsteps behind her. "Going somewhere?" Deandre's voice was casual, but Ava could hear the edge underneath. She turned to see him with Kayla and Malik, plus 2 other basketball players she didn't recognize. They had positioned themselves to block her path to the classroom. "I need to get to class," Ava said calmly. "You need to learn some respect," Kayla replied. "You embarrassed Dre in front of everyone the other day. I asked him to leave my friend alone." "Your friend?" Deandra laughed. "You mean the little punk who's been following us around with his camera?" Before Ava could respond, Kayla snatched the sketchbook from under her arm. "What's this? More of your weird drawings?" "Give it back," Ava said, her voice still calm, but with an undertone that made Malik shift uncomfortably. "I don't think so," Kayla said, flipping through the pages. "Some of these are pretty good. Too bad." She tossed the sketchbook toward a trash can at the end of the hallway. It hit the rim and fell to the floor, pages scattering. Ava looked at her drawings, images of her grandfather, her childhood home, the only connection she had left to her past spread across the dirty hallway floor. She felt something cold and final settle in her chest. "Pick it up," she said quietly. "Excuse me?" Kayla laughed. "I think you're confused about who gives orders around here." Ava knelt down and began gathering the scattered pages. As she did, She saw Jaden approaching from the other end of the hallway, his camera hanging around his neck as always. He was too far away to help, but close enough to see what was happening. "Look at that," Deandra said. "She's back on her knees where she belongs." As Ava stood up with her drawings, Kayla pushed her hard in the chest. Ava stumbled backward, her papers scattering again. "Oops," Kayla said with mock innocence. That's when Jaden arrived. "Hey, leave her alone," he said, his voice shaking but determined. "Oh look," Deandra said. "Here comes the cavalry." He shoved Jaden hard against the lockers. Jaden's head hit the metal with a sharp crack, and he slumped to the floor, dazed. And that was when Ava Cheng finally snapped. Everything seemed to slow down as she watched her friend fall. She saw Deandra turning back toward her with a smile on his face, saw Kayla laughing, saw Malik looking uncomfortable but not intervening. She saw other students gathering to watch, their phones already recording. But most of all, she saw her grandfather's face, heard his voice from years of training. Power without control is meaningless. But when someone threatens the innocent, control becomes the weapon. Ava moved. Deandra was still laughing when she grabbed his wrist and twisted, using his own momentum to send him stumbling backward. Before he could recover, she swept his legs and guided him to the floor with a technique so smooth it looked like he had simply fallen. Kayla started to say something, but Ava was already moving toward her. She didn't strike instead. She grabbed Kayla's wrist and applied pressure to a specific point, causing her to drop her phone and gasp in pain. "Don't move," Ava said quietly, her voice carrying absolute authority. Malik started forward, but Ava shifted her stance and looked at him with eyes that had seen too much pain and carried too much power. He stopped immediately. "Help your friend up," Ava said, releasing Kayla's wrist. "And then all of you are going to walk away." Deandra scrambled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and anger. "You think you're tough? I think. You're going to leave me and my friends alone," Ava interrupted. "And I think you're going to think very carefully about whether you want to test me again." She knelt down and helped Jaden to his feet, checking to make sure he wasn't seriously hurt. As she did, she was aware of all the phones recording, all the eyes watching. But this time, she didn't care. This time she had chosen to act. "Are you okay?" she asked Jaden softly. He nodded, though he was still shaking. "I got it," he whispered. "I got it all on video." As they walked away together, Ava felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not the false peace of avoidance, but the true peace that came from doing what was right, regardless of the consequences. Behind them, Deandra was helping Kayla to her feet, both of them looking around at the crowd of students who had witnessed their humiliation. The balance of power at Booker T. Washington High School had just shifted, and everyone knew it. But Ava wasn't thinking about power or revenge. She was thinking about her grandfather's words. The strongest warrior is not the one who always wins, but the one who knows when to fight and when to walk away. She had finally learned the difference. The principal's office at Booker T. Washington High had never felt smaller. Ava sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair across from Principal Davis, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the chaos swirling around her. To her left, Deandra slouched in his chair, his jersey wrinkled and his usual confidence nowhere to be found. Kayla sat as far away as possible, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled and her phone clutched protectively in her hands. "So let me get this straight," Principal Davis said, adjusting his glasses as he looked at the incident reports. "Mr. Miller, you're claiming that Ms. Cheng attacked you unprovoked?" "That's right," Deandra said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "She just went crazy and started throwing me around." "And Ms. Jordan, you're saying she assaulted you as well?" "She grabbed my wrist and twisted it," Kayla said, holding up her arm as evidence. "I think she might have broken something." "Principal." Davis turned to Ava. "And what's your version of these events, Ms. Cheng?" Before Ava could respond, there was a knock on the door. Ms. Riley entered, carrying a manila folder thick with papers. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Principal Davis, but I think you need to see this." She placed the folder on his desk. "I've been documenting incidents of harassment involving these students for the past month." "What kind of documentation?" the principal asked, opening the folder. "Photographs of Miss Cheng's vandalized locker, witness statements about verbal harassment, and screenshots of social media posts showing her being humiliated." Ms. Riley pulled out several printed images, including the video of Mr. Miller forcing her to clean his shoes. Deandre's face went pale. "That's not what happened, really?" Ms. Riley pulled out her phone. "Because I also have this." She pressed play on Jaden's video from the hallway confrontation. The footage was clear and damning. It showed Deandra shoving Jaden against the lockers, Kayla stealing and destroying Ava's drawings, and Ava's precise, controlled response to protect her friend. "This doesn't look like an unprovoked attack to me," Principal Davis said, his voice stern. "This looks like someone defending herself and her friend from bullies." "We weren't bullying anyone," Kayla protested. You were just what? Pushing a smaller student against lockers? Destroying personal property?" The principal's voice rose. "Ms. Jordan, Mr. Miller, I'm suspending you both pending a full investigation." As the words sank in, Deandra stood up abruptly. "You can't do that. I have scouts coming to see me play next week." "You should have thought about that before you decided to terrorize your classmates," Principal Davis replied coldly. "Your parents will be contacted and will be reviewing all disciplinary actions." After Deandra and Kayla left the office, escorted by security, Principal Davis turned to Ava. "Miss Cheng, while I understand you were defending yourself, I need to ask, where did you learn to fight like that?" "My grandfather taught me," Ava said quietly. "He always said that martial arts should only be used to protect yourself and others who can't protect themselves." "And that's exactly what you did," Ms. Riley said, placing a supportive hand on Ava's shoulder. "You showed remarkable restraint." As they walked out of the office together, Ms. Riley pulled Ava aside. "I want you to know that what you did took courage. Real courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're afraid." "I was afraid," Ava admitted. "I was afraid that if I started fighting, I wouldn't be able to stop, but you did stop. You used exactly the amount of force necessary to protect Jaden and no more. That's not the action of someone out of control. That's the action of someone with incredible discipline." That evening, Ava sat in her aunt's small apartment, telling May everything that had happened. Her aunt listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or asking a clarifying question. "I'm proud of you," May said finally. "Your grandfather would be proud too." "I broke my promise to him," Ava said. "I promised I would never use violence." "No, little one. You promised you would never use violence for the wrong reasons. What you did today, protecting someone who couldn't protect himself, that's exactly what he would have wanted." May pulled out a small wooden box that Ava had never seen before. Inside was a faded photograph of her grandfather as a young man, standing next to a group of other monks. "He wasn't always peaceful," May said softly. "During the war, he fought to protect his temple and the children who lived there. He told me once that the hardest thing wasn't learning to fight, it was learning when to fight." "What happened to him during the war?" "He saved many lives, but he also had to take some. It haunted him for the rest of his life. That's why he taught you about restraint, not because violence is always wrong, but because once you cross that line, you can never go back to who you were before." Ava looked at the photograph, seeing her grandfather's young face filled with determination and sadness. "I understand now. Do you? Because I think tomorrow will be very different for you at school." May was right. When Ava arrived at school the next morning, everything had changed. Students who had previously ignored her now nodded respectfully as she passed. Some even smiled. The viral video of her defending Jaden had spread beyond the school, with comments praising her restraint and technique. "You're like a celebrity now," Jaden said, walking beside her toward first period. "My video got over 1 million views." "I didn't want to be famous," Ava replied. "I just wanted to be left alone." "Well, you definitely won't be left alone now." 3 different martial arts schools have already contacted the office asking about you. At lunch, something unprecedented happened. Other students approached Ava's table. First came Maria Santos, a freshman who had been dealing with her own bullying problems. "I heard what you did," Maria said shyly. "I was wondering if you could maybe teach me some of those moves." "I'm not a teacher," Ava said gently. "I'm just a student." "But you could be," came a voice from behind them. They turned to see Malik Thomas standing there, looking uncertain but determined. "I mean, if you wanted to be." Ava studied him carefully. "Weren't you there when your friend was pushing people around?" "Yeah, I was," Malik said, his voice heavy with shame. "And I should have stopped him. I should have stopped him a long time ago. Why didn't you?" "Because I was scared. Scared of losing my spot on the team. Scared of being the next target." He sat down across from her. "But watching you stand up to him, watching you risk everything to protect Jaden, it made me realize that I've been a coward." "What do you want from me?" Ava asked. "I want to apologize. And I want to help make things right." Meanwhile, Deandra Miller was having the worst week of his life. His suspension had been extended after the investigation revealed a pattern of bullying behavior. College scouts had canceled their visits, and his teammates were avoiding him. For the first time in years, he was truly alone. He found himself in Ms. Riley's art classroom after school, staring at a painting of a storm-tossed ocean. He had come here because it was the only place in the school where he felt safe from this whispers and stares. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Ms. Riley said, entering the room with a stack of papers. "It was painted by a student who was going through a very difficult time." "I bet," Deandra muttered. "He was angry like you. Felt like the world was against him. Like everyone was out to get him." She set down her papers and looked at him directly. "He was also one of the biggest bullies I've ever taught." "What happened to him?" "He learned that anger was just fear wearing a mask. Once he figured out what he was really afraid of, he was able to start healing." Deandra was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know how to stop being angry." "What are you afraid of?" Ms. Riley asked gently. "Everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm afraid of being poor like my mom. I'm afraid of not getting a scholarship. I'm afraid of not being good enough at anything except basketball." "And you thought that if you made other people smaller, it would make you bigger?" "Yeah, I guess. I did. But it didn't work, did it? You just felt empty inside." Deandra looked at her with tears in his eyes. "How do I fix this? How do I make it right?" "You start by taking responsibility for what you've done. And then you figure out how to be the person you want to be instead of the person you're afraid of becoming." 2 weeks later, Ava stood at the podium in the school auditorium, looking out at hundreds of faces. The anti-bullying assembly had been Principal Davis's idea, but he had asked her to speak. She had written and rewritten her speech a dozen times, never feeling like she had found the right words. "I didn't want to be here," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. "Not just at this podium, but at this school. I wanted to be invisible. I wanted to get through each day without anyone noticing me." The auditorium was completely silent. Even the teachers had stopped grading papers to listen. But invisibility is a luxury that not everyone can afford. When someone is hurting you, when someone is hurting your friends, invisibility becomes complicity. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. In the third row, she could see Jaden with his camera, documenting everything. Near the back, Malik sat with some of his teammates, all of them listening intently. I come from a culture that values harmony and avoiding conflict. My grandfather taught me that the strongest person is the one who can walk away from a fight. But he also taught me that there are times when walking away means abandoning people who need your help. The day I stood up to the people who were hurting my friend, I wasn't being strong. I was being terrified. I was terrified that if I did nothing, someone I cared about would get hurt. I was terrified that my silence was making me part of the problem. She looked directly at Deandra, who was sitting in the back row by himself, his head down. But I also learned something else that day. The people who were hurting us weren't monsters. They were scared too. Scared of losing their power, scared of not being important, scared of being vulnerable. Real strength isn't about being able to hurt people. It's about being able to help them. It's about creating a place where everyone feels safe to be themselves. She took a deep breath, thinking of her grandfather's words. So I'm asking all of you, what kind of school do we want this to be? Do we want it to be a place where people are afraid to be different, afraid to be kind, afraid to stand up for what's right? Or do we want it to be a place where everyone can learn and grow and become the best version of themselves? The applause started slowly with just a few people clapping, but it grew until the entire auditorium was on its feet. Ava saw tears in some faces, determination in others. As she stepped down from the podium, Deandra was waiting for her in the hallway. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I'm sorry for everything I did to you and to Jaden. I'm sorry it took me so long to realize how much I was hurting people." "Thank you," Ava said. "That means a lot. I'm going to do better," he continued. "I'm going to be better." "I believe you," Ava replied. And she meant it. Spring arrived at Booker T. Washington High with a sense of renewal that went beyond the changing seasons. The school had implemented new anti-bullying policies, but more importantly, the culture itself was shifting. Students were looking out for each other in ways they hadn't before. Ava found herself at the center of this change, though not in the way she had expected. Rather than becoming a celebrity or a symbol, she had become a mentor. 3 afternoons a week, she taught basic self-defense in the gym to anyone who wanted to learn. But more than physical techniques, she taught confidence and awareness. Self-defense isn't about fighting, she told her students, a mix of boys and girls from all grade levels. It's about understanding your worth and refusing to let anyone take that away from you. Maria Santos, the freshman who had first approached her, had become one of her most dedicated students. "I never thought I could be strong," she told Ava after class one day. "But it's not about muscles, is it?" "No," Ava said. "It's about knowing that you have the right to take up space in this world." Meanwhile, Jaden's documentary about bullying and standing up for others had caught the attention of a local film festival. Silence is Not Peace had been selected for the youth category, and several colleges had reached out to him about their film programs. "I never would have made this if you hadn't shown me what real courage looks like," he told Ava as they walked home from school. "You were always courageous," she replied. "You just needed to believe in yourself." The biggest surprise came from an unexpected source. Deandra had started volunteering at a community center in his neighborhood, working with younger kids who were struggling with anger and violence. Ms. Riley had connected him with a counselor who specialized in helping young men process their emotions in healthy ways. "I want to break the cycle," he told Ava when they ran into each other at the community center. "I don't want any other kid to go through what I put you through." "How are you doing?" she asked. "Better. Not perfect, but better. I'm learning that it's okay to be scared sometimes. It's okay to not have all the answers." Even Kayla had started to change, though it was a slower process. She had transferred to a different school after the incident, but she had sent Ava a letter through Ms. Riley. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," the letter read. But I want you to know that I'm trying to be a better person. I'm in therapy, and I'm learning that the way I treated you came from my own insecurities and fears. I hope someday I can make it right." Ava had written back, not to absolve Kayla of her actions, but to offer encouragement for her journey toward becoming better. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom when Ava and Aunt May traveled to San Francisco's Chinatown to visit the temple where her grandfather had once studied. It was the first time Ava had been back to a place that reminded her so strongly of her childhood in China. In the quiet courtyard behind the temple, surrounded by the scent of incense and the sound of wind chimes, Ava practiced the forms her grandfather had taught her. But now, each movement felt different. Where once there had been grief and anger, now there was peace and purpose. "You've changed," May observed, watching her niece flow through the ancient patterns. "I've learned," Ava replied, finishing the sequence and bowing to the small altar in the corner. "I've learned that strength isn't about being invincible. It's about being willing to be vulnerable for the right reasons." She lit a stick of incense and placed it in the holder, watching the smoke rise toward the sky. "I think Grandfather would be proud." "I know he would be," May said. "You've become exactly what he hoped you would be, a warrior for peace." On the flight back to Detroit, Ava pulled out her notebook and began writing. She had been thinking about putting her experiences into a book, not just about the bullying and the fighting, but about the journey from silence to voice, from fear to courage. "The Way of the Quiet Warrior," she wrote at the top of the page. Chapter 1: Learning to Listen. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jaden. "Documentary got accepted to 3 more festivals. They want to interview you about your story." She smiled and typed back, "I'm ready to tell it." Another text came in, this one from Maria. "Thank you for teaching me that I'm worth defending." Then one from Malik, "Starting a peer mediation program at school. Want to help?" And finally, unexpectedly, one from Deandra, "6 months clean from my anger. Thank you for showing me a different way." As the plane descended toward Detroit, Ava looked out the window at the city that had become her home. It wasn't the quiet life she had planned when she first arrived, but it was something better, a life with purpose. She thought about the speech she would give at the upcoming regional conference on youth leadership, about the students she would continue to mentor, about the book she would write to help other young people find their voices. Most of all, she thought about her grandfather's words, "The strongest warrior is not the one who always wins, but the one who knows when to fight and when to walk away." She had learned to fight when it mattered. She had learned to walk away when it didn't. But most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the greatest victory was helping others find their own strength. As the plane touched down, Ava Cheng no longer the quiet new girl, but not yet the person she would become, closed her notebook and prepared to face whatever came next. She was ready for all of it. The story of the girl who was forced to clean shoes had become the story of the young woman who taught others to stand tall. And that story was just beginning. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.